Thank you. It works. This is great. I'm technologically challenged. Well, thank you. It's lovely to be with you. I apologize. I came back from the DR Congo on Monday, and I appear to have picked up the cold, so this is deeper than my normal voice. So a couple of weeks ago, I was actually at home in Virginia, which is unusual for me, and I was driving back from the IJM's office in D.C. to Alexandria, where I live. I was winding through these pretty residential streets, and I was thinking, God, it's really civilized driving here, compared to driving in Nairobi, Kenya, which is where I lived until last year. For those of you who might have been to Nairobi, there you can expect at any moment to be undertaken by a minibus driven by someone who clearly does not have a license, who may be drunk, who may be on the pavement, on the sidewalk. You will have 5 or 6 lanes of traffic just spontaneously appear at a perfectly normal-looking junction, creating a traffic jam for hours. And you'll generally be pretty much in fear of your life every time you get in the car. So I was thinking, feeling quite smug. This Virginia life, this is good. I like this. And then just a mere 400 yards from my home, just past that last turnoff where you could take the alternative route, I just hit this weirdly large, completely unnecessary to my mind, traffic jam. Right, if you're a less pastoral person than me, if you're, not such a great Christian, then you might get frustrated. You may be irritated in this type of situation, even angry. But no, not me. I did some deep breathing, started praying about some things that were on my mind, and I wait, because there are rules about these things, aren't there? You wait your turn, even if the traffic jam is unnecessary. And I waited for 30 minutes, so I was really practicing those pastoral skills quite extensively. And so what happens when I finally get up to this choke point where everyone's just, taking their turn? Well, you know what happens. A guy, and it was a gentleman, drove up the wrong side of the road at speed, honking his horn, went past the entire queue and barged in front of me. It's like being back in Nairobi. Unbelievable. I was so angry, I was on the verge of getting out of the car to tackle this matter of injustice right there and then. I was going to give that man a verse of the Bible and a small piece of my mind. Because, that's injustice, actually. That's what it feels like. I think most of us can relate. It's often the everyday frustrations of life that feel unjust. If you're a parent, very quickly, your children develop a strong sense of justice, largely attached to younger siblings. That's certainly how mine began, and is, my father would say, why I'm a lawyer. But when the Bible talks about injustice, it's talking about something that's very, very different. When the Bible talks about injustice, it's actually referencing a very specific sin. Injustice is the abuse of power from someone who has the power, taking good things that God made from someone who doesn't have power. That's what the Bible talks about when it's talking about injustice. Taking life, dignity, and the fruits of labor and love from people who are not as strong as you. And Ecclesiastes talks about this just really powerfully. Solomon says, "Again I looked and I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter." Power was on the side of the oppressors, and they have no comforter. That's the biblical picture of injustice. Someone who has power oppressing, pushing down someone who doesn't. And we see this really clearly, really jarringly, you'll remember, in the story of King David. I don't know about you, this is one of these stories that when I come to it in the Bible, I actually want to skip past it, because I really like King David. And then there's that moment, isn't there, in Samuel, when King David should have been at war. That's what the Bible says. It's the spring, it's the time when the kings go to war. But David is not at war. His army is at war, and he is lazing around the palace. Big mistake. And as he looks out, he sees a woman a couple of rooftops over. And we know where this is going. David decides, he who has already wives and money and power, that he wants more. He wants this woman, Bathsheba, for his wife. And he takes her. And what's worse, he tries to cover up this abuse of power by getting rid of her husband, who's not just any man either. The Bible talks about the fact he's one of David's closest warriors. Always when I think about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, it's David and these warriors, and he sends him to the front line of the war with specific instructions that he will die. And he does. So David, this great man of God, murders somebody to get his wife. And you will remember that when Nathan comes to confront David in 2 Samuel 12, actually the way he goes for the king when he speaks on behalf of God is he challenges his abuse of power. Because injustice is ugly. I mean, it makes us uncomfortable just thinking about it. And injustice offends God. So let's talk a little bit about statistics of injustice. Because you could think that this is just ancient text, this is history, or it happens elsewhere. I think there's part of us that hopes that our world today is more just and less brutal. But in my work as a prosecutor in Scotland and with IJM all over the world, I have really had it confirmed that that's simply not true. Ecclesiastes and David's story are just as current today as they were when they were written. Let me offer you a couple of statistics. According to the Global Slavery Index and the International Labour Organization, there are 40 million people living as slaves today. That is more than the total of the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. 40 million people today, while we sit here, are living in slavery. According to the United Nations, 4 billion people, 4 billion, live outside the protection of the law. They cannot call the police. They cannot call for help. In fact, if they call the police, it's probably going to get worse. Can you imagine? It's not that we live in a perfect world, but the idea that you cannot call for help, that nobody will come when someone comes after you, to me is completely terrifying. It's probably not your experience. It's not generally mine, although honestly it's how I felt when I lived in Kenya. But it is the world that Patrick and his family live in. Meet Patrick. This is the only photograph of Patrick. Like many of our clients, there's very little record of their lives, despite the fact that we live in a digital age. Like many young men in low-income neighborhoods in Nairobi, Patrick was faced with limited opportunities, rising costs of living, and huge unemployment. And so he tried petty crime as a solution, like lots of young men do. And he got arrested pretty early because, honestly, he wasn't very good at it, which for Patrick was probably a good thing. And he was charged with a felony, which could have resulted in him going to prison for a really long time. He was not convicted, and this was a really terrifying experience for him. Unlike many other young men, his family rallied around him, particularly his father. And this experience, combined with that, helped him to walk away and decide, no, I can do this. I can make my life, even amidst the hardship, lawfully. He was determined that he was going to make his family proud. He hoped that one day he might raise enough money to get married. And so he started a charcoal selling business. Now, this is super uncool if you're a Kenyan young man. It's hard to convey. My team were like, oh no, you'll never get married if you sell charcoal. This is terrible. But Patrick was like, this is a beginning. I'm very dedicated. I want to make a success out of this. And then on the 18th of February, back in 2010, Patrick went home to Korogocho, which is a slum in Nairobi, to visit his mum and dad and his twin brother, James. Just catch up on the news. As siblings do, he and his brother James caught up on each other's lives, who had a girlfriend, who didn't. They tried on each other's clothes. In fact, Patrick borrowed James's jacket for the day. And at 5 p.m., Patrick left and he boarded a matatu. For those of you who've been in Nairobi, those are the small, crazy minibuses used as public transport. Very quickly after he got on the matatu, however, 2 police officers armed with guns also boarded the matatu and commandeered the whole bus and all the passengers and directed that it be driven to Kariobangi Police Station, which is also in another low-income neighborhood. Nobody on the bus had any idea what was going on, but in Nairobi, you don't challenge the police. When they arrived at the police post, everybody was released except Patrick. Realizing that he was clearly going to be kept in custody overnight, Patrick asked one of the strangers on the bus, "Can you please call my family and tell them what's going on?" Please understand, in Kenya, you do not want to be detained by the police. And if you do, you want to make absolutely sure that somebody knows where you are. And so this stranger, because he lives in this world, did exactly that. At 6 p.m., Patrick's father received the call, and he immediately sent James down to Kariobangi police station to find out what was happening. James's first stop, as it would be for you or I, was the front desk of the police station, where he asked to check the OB. This is the occurrence book. It is the official record of everything the police do. But in the book, there was no record that Patrick was there. Strangely, though, while James was looking at the OB, he could hear Patrick's voice coming from the rear of the police station. So he walked out the front door, he walked around the rear of the police station, and he shouted Patrick's name, and Patrick responded. They found some ventilation holes in the rear of the cell block, and they caught up with what was going on. Patrick told James, "I have no idea why I'm here, but I'm handcuffed, and they won't let me out." James went right back into the front door here and said, "Well, here's the thing. I know my brother's in the back. I just spoke to him. Why is he not in the book? I want to see him." The result of that, he was threatened and chased from the police station by the officers on the front desk. So James did what we would all do, and he called home. Told his dad what was going on, and his dad said, "Look, this is the usual. You know what they're doing. They're keeping him overnight. They're going to ask us for a bribe, and they want us to pay more. We'll sort it out in the morning. It's getting dark now. You come home." And so it was that on the 19th of February, Patrick's parents came back here to the police station, and were told the same thing. "Your son is not here." So they went round all the other local police stations just to make sure. They went to the back. Nobody answered in the cells. And so at noon on the 19th of February 2010, Patrick's parents decided that they would visit the Nairobi City Mortuary. Because if a young man disappears from police custody in Kenya, that is where his family will go and look. At the mortuary, they found and identified Patrick's body, ridden with bullets. He was still wearing James's jacket. He'd been shot 8 times. The mortuary record said that he'd been brought in by a marked police vehicle from Kariobangi police station the previous night, that he was labeled as a John Doe, as if the police officers did not know his name. He was 26 years old. The official police report would later state that on the 18th of February, 4 police officers from Kariobangi, on a routine patrol, saw 4 young men suspiciously exiting a set of bushes. I don't know what that looks like, but that's what it said. The officers challenged the 4 men to stop, and they fled while shooting at the police officers. The police officers returned fire and killed 1 suspect. In the way of most police cover-ups in Kenya, the police claimed that they had recovered a toy gun, which was incapable of shooting anybody. The dead suspect was Patrick. So how do we respond to Patrick's story? Because it is not unique. How do we respond in the face of injustice? Well, the very best place to start always, isn't it, is to ask, how does God feel about it? And as it turns out, the answer to that question is pretty straightforward. If you have your Bibles, please turn with me. We're going to look at Isaiah 58. I'm reading from the NIV, which I hope is all right. We're going to start at verse 1. So we're looking at Isaiah chapter 58, and we're going to start at verse 1, and we're going to read the whole chapter. And this is God speaking, says Isaiah. "Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of their God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting you do as you please and exploit all of your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast that I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it for bowing one's head like a reed or lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you satisfy yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your light will be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild ancient walls and will raise up age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of broken walls, the restorer of streets with dwellings. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Amen. So I don't know about you. I feel like it's a pretty deeply convicting and challenging passage of Scripture. It's worthy of more reflection than we're going to be able to give it today. But here's the thing. God's message through Isaiah to the people of Israel was definitely not politically correct, was it? God's people are practicing a lot of piety. They are going to worship services. They are enhancing seasons of prayer that everybody notices. They are fasting. They are doing commandment keeping. They are doing the penance that is outlined in the Old Testament. But something was clearly missing. And it wasn't just God who thought that. The Israelites were in fact complaining about it. And the answer from God to his people was, what you do outside church matters. What you do outside church matters. The spiritual part of our life has to match the rest of it. Because there's no division. All of our lives belong to God. He sees it all matters. So God gives the Israelites, and he gives us this really helpful list of do's and don'ts. We'll start with the don'ts. Don't do your own thing. It's never a good idea. Do not exploit others. Don't quarrel and fight with your fellow church members. No one joins the body of Christ after that. Don't gossip and point your fingers, and we've all done it. Don't pray only when you're at church. Don't act humble. And don't act religious only when you're around religious people. Do loose the chains of injustice when you see them, when you can do something about it. Untie the cords of the yoke that bind people unfairly. Do set the oppressed free. Do share your food with people who are hungry and provide shelter to the homeless. Do clothe those who need clothing. Do serve your relatives, even those odd ones that you don't really want to look after. We all have them. We could be them. I'm possibly the odd relative. Do repair the good things that have been broken. If we want to experience the Sabbath rest that God talks about at the end of that passage, we have to start by heeding the practical calls to justice and mercy that precede the Sabbath. Those things are connected to each other. The promise that God has for us when we pay attention to justice and mercy in our devotion to Him is that He will answer our calls. Remember the end of that passage. We will flourish in the land. We will be a light shining in the darkness. We will be healed. The Lord will be our rear guard. And then when are you afraid to go somewhere if the Lord is behind you and His glory is before you? These are all the things the Israelites were seeking in the first place, and they were going completely the wrong way around it. And this is, in fact, how I and my colleagues at International Justice Mission have come to understand the mission of the church embodied in Jesus. IJM was founded more than 20 years ago to demonstrate this call to justice to real people experiencing injustice, so they could see the church, the hands and feet of Jesus, coming to their rescue. And that's why the story I started a few minutes ago about Patrick, that can leave us in despair, if we're honest, isn't finished. Patrick's family refused to accept that official police report was true. They knew it couldn't be true. They knew that Patrick had been in the police station. And so they set out themselves to try and figure it out. They retraced his movements. They actually tracked down the conductor and the driver of the Matatu. And they explained that when the two police officers got on the bus, they went directly to Patrick and pulled him to the front, as if they were going after him. And the family came to IJM, having heard about us at our church, and said, "Look, we're stuck and we need more help. Can you help us?" They wanted to see the police officers prosecuted, which never happens in Kenya. But Patrick's family were determined that there would be justice for their son. Our investigators did extensive work, and ultimately it was another man who'd been in the police cells that night with Patrick who provided for us the missing pieces. When we tracked him down, he explained to us that he had been arrested for being drunk and disorderly. And he'd been thrown in the cells. Patrick was already there, handcuffed. So he and Patrick got chatting, as you do when you've nothing else to do in a police cell. And they both considered that they'd probably be released in the morning, and the question was simply how much of a bribe they'd have to pay. But at midnight, police officers entered the cell, and they took Patrick away, still handcuffed. He was never seen alive again. The police would always deny that he had been in custody. Remember, the formal record did not include him. They never alleged that he'd escaped from his handcuffs or anything. They simply said he was out committing a robbery with 3 other men and a toy gun. Ultimately, through our investigations, Police Constable Wilfred Mwiti was charged with Patrick's murder because the bullets from his firearm matched the bullets in Patrick's body. The case took 6 years to complete. But on the 28th of April 2016, I was working in my office in Nairobi when I got the call I had been waiting for from our team at court. Constable Mwiti, in an absolute first for Kenya, had been convicted of manslaughter for the death of Patrick. And we were so happy. The prosecutor in me was disappointed that it wasn't a murder conviction, but baby steps. This is a first for Kenya. And we celebrated with Patrick's family, who had fought so courageously and so faithfully in the face of threats from their local police and lots of gossip from their community as the police talked about how Patrick was a criminal and deserved what he had got. To our knowledge, the case of PC Mwiti is the first police officer ever to be convicted in Kenya for abusing his power. This story of justice in the face of seemingly impossible odds is really amazing. And we worked for 15 years in Kenya before we got this first conviction. So it can seem like a mere drop in the bucket, can't it, when you consider that there are 4 billion people like Patrick who don't have any law enforcement protection. But it isn't, because the scope of what we do at IJM is growing every day, from just one case to more. Now, many of you know these wonderful people. This is the IJM Kenya team who secured justice for Patrick. IJM consists of just over 850 Christian lawyers, criminal investigators, trauma-trained specialists, pastors, graphic designers, drivers, you name it, we have them. This is Kenya. We have nearly 19 offices. So there are 18 groups that look not dissimilar to this, doing the same work across the globe. We are working in Africa, in Latin America, in South and Southeast Asia. And in each of those places, we are seeing real freedom and justice, not simply for people abused by the police, for people caught in slavery or surviving sexual assault. We are seeing freedom and justice for communities and for countries. So let me talk to you, for example, about Cambodia. When we started working in Cambodia, it was ground zero for pedophiles and sex tourists. We spent a decade working with Cambodian government, with the police, with courts, with social services and NGOs, all focused on one aim: to build a criminal justice system that would consistently respond to that evil by arresting and successfully prosecuting the perpetrators. And that has dramatically changed the picture in Cambodia. When we started in 2003, sex trafficking was just an epidemic. Children as young as 6 would be bought and sold in the open. Police officers would stand and watch it. They would often profit from it. Nothing would be done. But in a 2015 prevalence study in 3 major Cambodian cities, independent consultants found that now less than 0.1% of people in the sex trade are children, because it became dangerous to sell children. It was more likely than not that you would be caught and prosecuted. There are certainly other challenges in Cambodia, and our team now works on labor trafficking, which is a major problem. But let us just pause for a moment and acknowledge that the result of law enforcement is that there are thousands of children who will never be the victims of sex trafficking, who will live lives completely free of that, because the law is working for them. And likewise in Kenya, we see tremendous signs of hope and encouragement because of the faithfulness of this team and the faithfulness of our amazing God. The conviction of the police officer in Patrick's case in 2016 was our first. We have been in Kenya for 16 years now. This year alone, 7 police officers were convicted of serious offenses of violence. Most of those cases belong to our partners, which is so encouraging. And as one officer after another is held to account, it creates a ripple effect, where if you are a police officer in Kenya, you begin to be a little bit afraid that the law may just apply to you, as well as everyone else. It begins to break the culture of impunity. And of course, we know that real change and transformation has to come also from the highest authorities. And we are seeing change there where honestly we thought it wasn't possible. A massive grassroots movement demanding police reform and accountability has emerged. This largely from slum areas like Kariobangi, where people have everything to lose from standing up against the police. The Inspector General of Police in Kenya has just signed on to a comprehensive police reform bill supported by the President. If you had asked me if this was possible 2 years ago, I would have told you only by a miracle of God. And that is what God does. And just last week, to my great joy, 50 senior police officers lost their jobs when vetting showed that they were very corrupt. Back in the day, if you were very corrupt, you just got a round of applause and sent back out. But now you lose your job. And that is amazing. So let this miraculous truth sink in as we think about Cambodia and about Kenya. Every day we move closer to seeing the end of slavery and the end of impunity for violence against the poor in our lifetimes. It will happen in our lifetimes. From the perspective of the mission of the church, this is precisely what happens when the people of God respond to the call to justice. Which brings us back to us, to you and me. What can we actually do here in this church to make a difference? What can I do? What can you do? Because if we're honest, if you're like me, I look at massive need and, maybe a slightly complex solution, and I feel a little bit stifled by the magnitude of it all. I think, well, that's awesome, but, I don't work for IJM. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an investigator. And I'm here in Colorado. I don't know what to do. And it's in these times that I remember the story of the feeding of the 5,000. I'm sure you all know it. Actually, it's my favorite story to teach at Sunday school because it's the one I always need to remember. Jesus has gone off to this remote location to teach. In fact, my best friend is there right now, which is exciting. And people are loving what he has to say, as you can imagine, so they don't really want to leave. And Jesus teaches all day, and the sun is beginning to set, but there's no food. And people are getting hungry. Maybe they're even getting grumpy. The disciples definitely are. They are the voice of reason. And we've all got the voice of reason, haven't we? I'm the voice of reason a lot of the time. And the apostles come up and they say, Jesus, look, you just got to stop. It's been great. Great job. I think you just need to send these people home so they can get something to eat. And Jesus, like any good boss, and I really like this approach, he just says, you feed them. Off you go. And, you can imagine, the disciples are like, the boss doesn't get it. I'm panicking because apparently he thinks I can feed 5,000 people. But I'm going to rephrase this for you, boss. So I'm paraphrasing here, but you think the conversations probably goes like this, right? Perfect, I get it. But let me just explain to you, Jesus, it's super nice that you think we should feed all these people, and I agree. Wouldn't that be great? But I don't think you've noticed there is like 5,000 people here. There are 5,000 of them. That's a really, really large number. It's a lot of food. And it's probably going to take half a year's wages to do that. I don't know about you. We don't have that. That immediately on us, we don't have that kind of cash. And even if we did have that much money, we're in a remote location. The nearest Costco is a couple of 100 miles away. We're all out of plans. We're done. So back to you, boss. It's like, I've fixed this for you. Boss, you take it. And isn't this, if we're honest, this is precisely the situation that we find ourselves in today? We are trying to learn to love like Jesus in our broken world. And Jesus has put seemingly impossible, ridiculous need in front of us. End injustice. Oh, okay, all right. And we're thinking, wow, Jesus, that is such a good idea. Totally think we should end injustice. Brilliant. But frankly, we just don't have what it takes, so I think you should do it. And it's important to note what Jesus does when the apostles are pointing out the impossibility of a practical solution. He just asks two questions. And they're the only two questions, actually, that ever matter. The first question, well, what do you have? What do you have? And the disciples look around, and there's a small boy who's got his little sack lunch, so they steal it, they borrow it, and they say, there you go, that's what we have. We have 5 teeny tiny loaves and 2 really, really small skinny fish. But Andrew, of course, points in with the practicalities. Not a lot for 5,000 people, boss. It's what we have, it's fine. And so Jesus, ignoring the sarcasm, which I think he must have been really good at, he asks the second question, will you give it to me? What do you have, and will you give it to me? Jesus is telling us today just what he told the apostles thousands of years ago on that hillside in Galilee. He will take responsibility for the miracle. It isn't our job. All he's asking from the apostles, all he ever asks from us, is will we come forward in obedience with what we have, whatever that is, and will we trust him for the miracle of what he will do with it? And what does he do with it? He feeds the 5,000. abundantly. And there are basketfuls of food left over because he doesn't do things by halves. And while we sit here this morning, or stand here if you're me, then Kenyans are living with what the World Police Index will tell you is the third worst police force in the world. They are beaten only by Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of the Congo in terms of less effective policing and less protection. There are just a significant number of police officers in Kenya like Constable Mwiti. They're not worthy of the badge. They're not worthy of the name police officer. They don't work to protect the people of Kenya. They operate like an organized criminal gang, making it very difficult for good police officers, and they are there to flourish. They extort money from the poor. They punish people who can't pay with false charges, a night in the cells, sometimes years in prison on false charges. The core ministry of IJM is fighting violence. The people of God are critical to this fight. It is a mission of the church. You are critical. When I look at violent criminals like Constable Mwiti, who killed Patrick, and those who protect them, in all of the countries where I work, I am always amazed at the resources and the time and the energy that they will put into crime, into its cover-up and into its justification. What would happen if the people of God joined together and put their significant resources and their time and their energy into ending impunity and building justice systems that work? What will happen? I know what will happen. It's exactly what happened on that hillside. The endemic violence will end, and there will be abundant justice, because that's what God is calling us to bring. So I'm going to issue just a very specific challenge to you today. Can you offer up your sack lunch? Can you join Jesus on this bold mission? Specifically, join with us at IJM until all are free, until everybody is free from slavery, from injustice, from oppression, free to be the children and the men and the women that God designed them to be. We can all be part of the solution. You don't have to work for IJM. You might want to work for IJM. We'd love to have you. You don't have to give financially. There are so many ways to help the mission. But the church is at the heart of God's plan for justice. The Bible makes that very, very clear. If we are witnesses to the kingdom of God in this way, then we know what's going to happen. Your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. People are desperate to see God at work in the world. And when the people of God pursue justice, there's something ridiculously attractive about that. That's how God made it. But we have to be bold enough to give our little sack lunch, don't we? In the face of overwhelming odds, and because it feels a bit stupid, and trust that God will do a miracle with it. So I want to invite you to join our global community of believers who are seeking to end violence and injustice by becoming Freedom Partners. Freedom Partners give $24 or more to IJM every month. In addition, these are the people that we call upon to pray regularly for our urgent needs in the field. When things are going wrong, when we're stuck, it is our Freedom Partners who come alongside us and pray in the moment. They advocate for life-saving legislation, the legislation that funds the Modern Slavery Initiative, for example. They attend special IJM events. Because the fact of the matter is, I know how to end abusive policing in Kenya. We know how to do it. We have a plan. And because of Freedom Partners and churches like Newday, we're already seeing lots of progress. But we want to do more. So right now, I want you, it's in my pocket. I know that you have these. You can wave them at me. I know that you have these. They're around about. So I want you to take it, and I don't want you to drop it. Don't put it on the floor. I want you to really prayerfully consider whether you can sign up and give and become a Freedom Partner. Your recurring gift is literally going to save lives. And maybe you can't give. Maybe you can pray. And I can promise you from working in the field from IJM, we'll survive on the prayers of the people who support us. Hundreds of thousands of people fuel the mission with their prayers, with their volunteer time, with their money. And none of what we do is possible without all of that work happening in the background. So please have a look at your envelope. My prayer for us is quite simply, in a world that is yearning to know the goodness of God, in a world that's turning away from God, but it's just so desperate, we know, to see him. My prayer is that we're going to leverage our lives. We're going to bring our little sack lunch, whatever it looks like, and we're going to give it to God and watch him do a miracle with how it will impact others. Because I promise you, that is going to bring the people in your community, it's going to bring the people that you love in your families to go, really? Why are you doing that? Did God do that? Maybe I will come to church with you. And that's what we want. We want to save the world. And it's one of the ways that we do it. Let's let God work his miracle of justice with our little sack lunches. And then we can give him all the glory with what he's done. Thank you very much. I'm really grateful.